Today and this week is a celebration of business in Cheyenne. One of our favorite events of the year is the Circle of Champions program. It has been inspiring to hear from folks who have poured their heart and soul into our community. We are very excited to hear from this year's Circle of Champions honorees. Our interview this year will be conducted by Greg Dykman of Dre, Dykman, Reed, and Healy. Greg, we really appreciate that you have volunteered your time to help us with this very worthwhile project. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce this year's honorees, Dr. Sloan and Anna Marie Hales. They've been involved in many facets of our community. Sloan and Anna Marie, we are grateful that you have agreed to sit down with us today and visit about your journey as citizens of our community. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Greg, Dr. Sloan, and Anna Marie Hales.
I think you're going to enjoy getting to know more about them, more about what they do and what makes them tick. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask them to give a short, and emphasis on short, background as they were growing up and up until the time that they got married. So whichever of you wants to start first.
I am very excited to be here today, and I leaned over to my hubby about 20 minutes ago and I said, "Are you still a member of the chamber?" And he said, "I think I am." Well, if we're not, we better get that information and get signed.
Before dark. Before dark.
The most exciting thing for me today is to see so many old friends, but so many new people who are here and investing their time in Cheyenne. I was blessed to be a very good parent born in Cody, that little wonderful place up in the corner of the state of Wyoming. I was the first child born in the United States. My mother and father were from Alberta, Canada, as were two sisters, as an older sister and then a twin brother and sister. I have a younger brother, so two were born in Wyoming and three in Canada. It was a very interesting, wonderful childhood in Cody. I was able to participate in anything. I was able to do anything I wanted in the school system. We had a wonderful school system. I didn't have to specialize at age 4 in soccer or in piano or in anything. I could do it all, and I did. I loved it. Able to study French for 4 years, wonderful French teacher. So I am saying that Wyoming is so fortunate to be the type of state that it is, to allow people to come in and participate, do anything they want. And my background in Cody was a wonderful, wonderful beginning for me. My parents had lost everything in Alberta, Canada. My father was a sheep herder. Due to unusual, very peculiar circumstances, they lost the herd and came to Cody, where with a small amount of money became invested in a small oil company. And from there on, it's another story.
Sloan?
Now, in contrast to Anna Marie, I was born in California, but I typically don't mention that to people, but nonetheless, I'm from Los Angeles. My parents were both from agricultural backgrounds. My mother was born and raised in the Bridger Valley, so she truly was from southwest Wyoming. My father was from a small town in Utah. Ultimately, they both drifted out into Los Angeles. He was a dental student at University of Southern California, and my mother was working for the railroad. In the 1920s, they married, and there were ultimately 3 children. I'm the youngest of 3. My parents were actually in their 40s when I came along. But when it comes to childhood things that maybe framed life afterwards, my father insisted that all the children, starting at about age 14, would take a 3x5 card. And starting like at age 14, you would write on the card, hope to graduate from high school in 3 years, or want to take more piano lessons, or want to try out for the basketball team. Some things that seemed trivial maybe, but other things got more important. And just to demonstrate that this really was in play in my life, a very goal-oriented parentage, I pull out of my wallet right now a card I made 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, this was made in 1960, it said, marry in 2 years. I didn't even know Anna Marie. Parenthood in 3 years. That happened, by the way. So graduating with a bachelor's degree, 4 years, medical school, 8 years, but it's all on a card of over 50 years ago. Now, for some people that might work, other people maybe less so, but to me, it was kind of a framing sort of thing in our family. My father and mother, they said, sure, play on the athletic teams, but don't plan on us being there. But take your piano lessons and stay on the honor roll, and we'll be there all the time. Now, of course, things have changed. Some of you will take exception to that. In fact, my parents occasionally would do a little spanking, and the other 99% of the time, we were intimidated and all fell into line. But I think, I think an issue in today's world, and I'm just grateful for what I experienced in Los Angeles so many years ago, was that the parents were goal-oriented, and if you didn't have it on the 3x5 card, they would remind you that maybe you should include more on it. But with that.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's talk about after you met each other and got married and started to have a family and spend some time overseas. Let's talk about that period of time.
Well, you see, I was under pressure to meet Sloan, have children, and and I was very obedient. Our first child arrived about 10 months after marriage, and I was really worried about the uncles and aunts, and my husband said, well, you do know that babies are born on lunar months, not calendar months. And I said, what in the Sam Hill is a lunar month? And he said, well, it's much shorter than a calendar month. So I was grateful for the 10 months after marriage. We have 6 children, and the first 5 were wonderful bonuses from each location where we lived, beginning, excuse me, beginning in Cincinnati, where my husband was in medical school. I was in graduate school. We moved to San Diego, where we had a daughter. He was now in an internship. Then we went to Fresno, another daughter, where he was in residency. Then we went to Germany, and a son came back to Cheyenne and had 2 more daughters. So we have 5 daughters and 1 son. Our family constellation has been formed on several, what you might call rigid moral values. Number 1, having 5 daughters, I was very worried about their living in a world where certain things were popular, peer group would suggest certain events. And so we had a very rigid rule. My mother called me one day and said, I want you to tell me about what you do in your family that you feel will bring success in your 6 children. She was preparing a lesson for a class. And I thought, and there have been 2 very standard things in our family. Number 1, and you will all laugh at this, both of us are keyboardists. And it was important to us that every single child give a senior piano, and in most cases it was a senior piano and organ recital. In one case it was a senior piano, organ, and horse jumping exhibition recital, and we would invite close friends and family. So it was important to us that music, which we believe enhances absolutely every quality of life. Secondly, this I know sounds very strange in 2014, but I had dress standards for our daughters. Believe it or not, the biggest fight that I had to give in was wearing pants to school. I never got to wear pants to school. Why should my children get to? I didn't wear pants to school in Cody, but of course, being in Wyoming in the wind and the cold, it became obvious that as you grow and you mature, that you also grow and mature into it. So for me and for my husband, we never argued over discipline, and we were able to maintain a joint viewpoint when it came to the goals that we had for our children.
Sloan, anything to add?
Well, I think one of the things that made a major imprint upon us in raising children and experiencing those early years in life. By the way, the one picture is 52 years ago, and the other picture was 52 days ago. But you can tell the difference, I'm sure. The Army gave us a 3-year tour of duty in Germany. I had just finished a 5-year surgical residency, and with that, the German experience was incredibly favorable. I wasn't a volunteer, and every time I sit in an audience where they say, will any veterans stand up, I think, well, I'm a veteran, but I didn't necessarily raise my hand for that. And yet it was a great experience. It was during the selective service, and at my age, I was 32, and I was taking active duty. And when I went down to officers training, they said, instead of going to Vietnam, we're evacuating. It was in '71. But we're going to send you to Germany, and with that, you'll be there 3 years, but your wife and children can go. So at the time, we had 3 children, and they were all school age, by the way. So Anna Marie was a good sport. We went to Germany. I'd lived there in the late 50s when Germany was still reconstructing. I lived with German people for 3 years. In fact, my bachelor's degree is in the German language. So that was an exciting...
Why he got into medical school, none of us know.
So arriving in Germany, I just happened to be assigned to an area where I had German friends from 12 years earlier. And Anna Marie was a little naive but obedient, and she said, well, I'll do whatever you want to do. And so we rented a house in a small town. We stayed away basically from the American culture. I did go to the hospital, a large Army General Hospital in Stuttgart, every day, but the children went to German schools, and Anna Marie stayed in the community, and it was a marvelous experience. And Anna Marie became fluent in German if you don't consider grammar.
Well, I'm very outspoken, and I love to talk, and I asked hundreds of questions. And there's a common myth that, oh, children will learn language at the snap of a finger. Not true. It was 7 months of stomach aches going to school every morning from one day.
Well, let's be honest now. When the children loved the experience, and then...
But it was tough.
But at the same time, when we came to Cheyenne 3 years later in '74, we were over here in the avenues, and the children were all enrolled at Deming. And it was actually 40 years ago this month. In fact, for the first month, we lived in the Hitching Post motel down the road here, and then we found a house to buy in the avenues, and the children were all enrolled at Deming. And within a week, the principal called us in and said, your children don't know A, B, C, D, E, F. They know A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And what should we do? And I said, what do you mean? We're going to keep them at the same grade level, and we'll work with them. But when they came to Cheyenne, they basically, if they ever got upset, they just spoke German to one another. And even all these years later, we kind of, with tongue-in-cheek, will speak German in our household. At the same time, we have no ancestry from Germany. So with that, all we can say, it was a great cultural experience. It was a learning experience. And Anna Marie, again, was a major influence by simply adapting and saying, if that's what you want, the family will be part of it.
Actually, I just want to add one thing. It wasn't that my husband signed a contract, and in being honorable, we honored this contract. But the German experience, learning another language, has influences in your life. For instance, when we came back and drove into Wyoming and crossed the border, the children said, don't we have to stop at the guardhouse? Where's the guard? Don't we have to sign in? Don't we? And the one element that you gain when you live in a foreign country and really adapt to the foreign country is your homeland is every everything to you and the appreciation that you have, that our ancestors have when they came to America, the freedom of choice, the hope of success or failure, and the freedom of movement. Those are things that are really sacred, and we need to maintain them in our country.
Sloan, you've talked a little bit about your medical career, but why don't you tell the folks a little something about that career and some changes in that career?
Well, I'm still active staff here on the local hospital. I've been here 40 years. I was here as a general surgeon in the 1970s. In the late 70s, Anna Marie and I made a decision that kind of impacted our life forevermore. But I frequently share this with people, that the three best decisions I ever made in life was marrying Anna Marie, a girl from Cody, and Los Angeles and Cody mixed very well. And then secondly, the next best decision I made was buying the Wyoming Hereford Ranch back in the 1970s. And the third decision was that I transitioned as a general surgeon and did another residency as an anesthesiologist. And here, all these years later, I'm still active staff at the hospital.
And then he did a C-section on a cow, and I said, no vet school. We've had all the training.
But you know, the great thing in my medical experiences that go back close to now 50 years is that in those good old days, if they wanted to specialize, they either became a surgeon, and in my case, a general surgeon, and that actually is a little hard to imagine today, but as a general surgeon, you dealt with anything from the top of the head to the tip of the toes. Nowadays, everything is very, very specialized, and everybody has a niche, if you will. And then if you didn't want to be a surgeon, you became an internist, an internal medicine specialist. And with that, you didn't even have a fellowship to do cardiology or gastroenterology or endocrinology. You just were well qualified, and you opted to do whatever you did. Now, when I was in Fresno, sports medicine had not been identified, so that was not a label. And those people who attended to athletes were simply what they were. They were a physician. They had an MD degree. So there wasn't anything at all specialized in terms of sports medicine. And so at the Fresno State University, the athletic director fortuitously became a friend of ours, and he said, our only team physician is leaving. Could you be available? And for 2 years, I was the one and only team physician at Fresno State. And of course, nowadays, when you watch anything on television, it's a cadre of distinguished people that run out onto the field. And all I can say at Fresno State, our head coach was Darryl Rogers. Some of you might know that name. He went on to finish his career at the Detroit Lions head coach. But Darryl Rogers was a very spiritual person, and he knelt with the team in prayer before each game. And of course, I prayed harder than anybody. But it was a marvelous experience. And again, medicine was simple. And I got to say, even as a surgeon, in my era, and I think of this rather frequently today, surgery was safe for the most part. Nothing's really safe entirely, but surgery was safe, and it was fairly simple, and it was affordable. And now we live in an era where, yes, surgery is probably less safe, somewhat dangerous. It's somewhat complicated versus my era, and it's very costly. And those three issues bother me immeasurably today. But we live in an era where everybody wants something done, and yet realistically, the answer's not there. But if you repeatedly request it, you'll find somebody who'll provide it. And my cautionary note is just think very carefully about what might happen, because there are complications. And I think from so many years ago, in my case, 45 years ago, becoming a surgeon, and for 14 years of my life, I did that. And then when I was age 40, I went to the University of Colorado and did another residency as an anesthesiologist.
Well, I got to know Anna Marie by serving on boards with her, which I've done now for many, many years. And Anna Marie is especially well known for her contributions to many organizations in this community, both charitable and also public corporations. So I'd like for you to tell people what it is that causes you to do that kind of thing and what you get out of it.
Do you know what it's like to be asked a question like that of Greg Dykman, who earlier this morning, now afternoon, I introduced to Little America's general manager, Scott French, and I said, this is Cheyenne's #1 volunteer citizen, no holds barred. He is it. And as we were sitting,
Thank you.
and as we were sitting at the table, I heard one of the chamber individuals say, now, what about the phone calls? What about this? And I said, wait a minute. He's supposed to be calling for the symphony. What's he calling for you? So it is an honor to have him here. Such a pleasure to serve with Greg. And he knows something and learned something long ago that I am trying to learn, and that is he's a very cautious, careful, thoughtful listener when he's on boards. And I tend to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more outspoken. But to all of you new people, I just have one word to say. Cheyenne is wide open. Anything you want to do, anywhere you want to serve, raise your hand, make a phone call, go on the internet. And once you start, there's no end. You're going to have to do as Greg does, go into work Saturdays and Sundays, because Monday through Friday he's volunteering. And I think I've lived in one of the best eras of Cheyenne. I've been on 2 different bank boards, one bank who changed its name about 3 or 4 times while I was on it. And yet, still, though this is not, I don't believe this is the case in Los Angeles or Denver, Chicago. People in Cheyenne, serving can make a difference. Honestly, we can. And my husband even looked up a little bit of the bio of the chamber, and you've got that one word where it says serving. And I just have to emphasize the importance of that one word. Years ago, I was asked to do a series of 5 lectures on self-esteem. I was all over it. Did my research, had my papers ready, and it was for a group of mixed youth, young men, young women. I did the first lesson, and boy, I felt good about myself. Oh, that was a great lesson. I did the second lesson. I didn't feel so good. And I even woke up in the middle of the night between the second and the third lesson, and I decided, this is not what you were taught in Cody. This is not what your mother and your father taught you. They taught you that when you are serving, that's what makes you happy. So I changed from my me, myself, and I approach for the self-esteem for the young people to mimic what my mother said when I got married. You always expect that wonderful week before, the night before, you know, the talk that today's youth don't have to have, but in my era, but in my era we had to have. And her words were very simple. Anna Marie, if you get mad at your husband, go into the kitchen and bake him a cherry pie. And I thought that was the silliest. I just thought, oh, mother, as young people do. As I've matured and grown, her message was, you can't be mad at yourself or anyone else if you're serving. You're out there devoting your time and energies to other people. And that's been my pleasure in Cheyenne, is to have these opportunities to serve. And I really admonish the chamber to keep on highlighting that. It said something like serving as leaders in promoting, et cetera. It's the service that makes you happy and makes you contented.
Of course, fortuitously, Cheyenne is the perfect fit in our case, at least, where coming here 40 years ago, the size of the community and even the size of the community today, it allows one to still maintain individualism and uniqueness, but immerse oneself in a community that's very predicated on volunteerism. And in Anna Marie's case, she's got a great organizational mindset. She likes to sit on committees, she likes to interact and share ideas, and I think many of you have experienced that in recent years or over 40 years. In my case, I don't necessarily do that so well, and hence I pursue some other things. But in Cheyenne, the great thing for us, and I mention it as number 2 in the best decisions I made, in buying the Wyoming Hereford Ranch, I don't know, some of you maybe have never been there, but it's never closed, nobody's off limits, and there's no such thing as a no trespassing sign, so everybody's welcome. But in our 35 years of owning the property out east of town, and you can see it from the interstate on I-80 and exit 367, the Federal Highway Department has their own signage. It's a great historical property. It has, that part of it has nothing to do with Anna Marie and Sloan. But for 35 years, we've been able to kind of maintain what it is. And I'm making some very conservative numbers, although some of you will challenge me on this. I think in 35 years, we've had well over 300,000, if not closer to 400,000 visitors. We have about 25 buildings out there. A lot of them are unlocked, where people can wander around and do their own, looking at a ranch from the 1880s. The ranch has always had purebred Hereford cattle, and with some historians that are interested in this, it's the oldest continuous registered livestock operation in the United States. Now there's older ranches, but it's always had the registered Hereford animal. And it goes back to the 1880s. It was part of the Swan Land and Cattle. But today what we have is very reduced. We have the headquarters complex, but we have 3 miles of Crow Creek, and all 3 miles are available for walking, and we have walking paths out there. And by the way, there's no commercialism here. I'm not trying to suggest that anybody come out and it's a commercial sort of experience, but people come, they picnic, we've had family reunions, we've had wedding parties, we have about 60 events a year. At one time we probably had 80 or 90. Anna Marie and I don't directly participate unless it's a unique special circumstance, but we invite people to come. For us, it's been good.
You can come out and identify close to 100 different species of birds, if you
Well,
want
actually
to.
120.
120.
And the point is, to me, this is good for what it represents from yesteryear. It's something from the 19th century. If we have a little guest registry that maybe one person and 20 signs, you know how that would be. But in the course of a year, we usually have 30, maybe 30 different states represented, usually 5 foreign countries. And with that, hopefully people have a little insight to Wyoming of so many decades ago. We feel like people can come out. It's good for the cattle industry overall. I would trumpet Hereford animals, but we know that you probably look for the labeled Angus product. But truth be told here, and there are some cattle people here.
Now we're in dangerous territory. Watch out.
But it's the English bred animal. It's the Shorthorn, it's the Angus, and the Hereford really that brings the quality to American meats. And we can talk about that later. But at the same time, here's our vision. We have devoted a lot of time and energy for people to come out and just have that experience. We think it's good for the area. We would like to think, and maybe we'll live long enough to see this happen, that somehow we can create a preservation of the land too, some conservation measure where at this point when we talk about 2 to 3 miles of creek where people, particularly the Audubon people, will walk the creek and look for the birds and so forth, but we've kind of fenced off 2 miles from the cattle and put weirs in the creek to spread out the wetlands, and we've accomplished that, I think, very well on Crow Creek. So what I'd like to think And you people in the chamber and the younger people will probably see some of these things happen. But those who look to the future, they can see not just 100,000 people in Laramie County, mind you, but 200,000 people in Laramie County. And in our case, we're not in the city yet, but our mailbox, I think, is. So with that, there's going to be great expansion of the population here in the area. And maybe some of you can help me in this regard, but I keep looking at the map, and when I see southeast Wyoming, I maybe see 1,000 or 2,000 acres, and Anne Marie and I'll be long gone, but some of you might see this, where that's a green area, and everything around it is what it is. Some of it will be residential, some of it will be the commercial parkway there on Campstool Road. Last week they had the ribbon cutting for the gas-fired power plant and things like that. I wish I could say something about the location of that plant. We could have put it on the ranch and hid it from everybody, but instead it's right on the interstate. But by the way, we had nothing to do with that transaction. But in any event, the future is coming, and the residents and the population here are going to be considerable. I think people in Colorado are catching on to that and are pushing from the northern part of Colorado into Wyoming for obvious reasons. And with that, I think it's exciting. But how we protect the landscape and the topography is going to be up to a lot of you and the decisions you make. And thanks to the Chamber, I think it's a marvelous organization. 18 years ago, the Chamber kind of gave us a little focus of attention for one of their annual evening banquets. And with that, I thought, well, that's the first 20 years in Cheyenne. Now we're taking the second 20 years. But just congratulations to everybody, and thank goodness for Greg Dykman. If anybody trumps Greg, I'd like to know who it is. So thank you, Chamber.
And I know that we've mentioned Christmas, we've mentioned other holidays that are coming up, and as I was thinking about today of the Chamber and of other things that are happening, and with Thanksgiving coming, my mind just went to work in overload. But if you really think about that word Thanksgiving, we know what it represents overall, but take it apart, and you are thankful for the giving of so many other people. And then I took another word, and to me this embodies what Cheyenne really is, and that is thanks living. Because we are so thankful that we can do so many things and be of service, our living will be of a much higher quality, of a much higher resource for all people. Years ago, we lost a daughter, and the community enveloped us in their arms. And that is how I have always looked at Cheyenne, is that I am responsible for you, and you are responsible for me.
Well, we could keep going for a long time, but we don't have the ability to do that. So let's say they'll be taking questions in the hallway. But let's give them one more round of applause and thanks. Sloan and Anna Marie Hale.